You are not born into scandal. You are born into silence. That is the distinction your mother makes on the morning your father tells you about the arrangement. She does not argue with him. She does not cry in front of you. She sits very still at the breakfast table and looks at her hands, and later that evening, when your father is asleep and the house has gone quiet, she comes to your room and says, "What people say about him is not the whole of him. Listen for the part they don't say." You are 17 years old. You do not understand what she means. You will. You will understand all of it eventually. Your mother has the specific skill of women who have navigated difficult lives. She speaks in instructions that only make sense after the moment that required them. By morning, you have said yes. Not because you want to. Because the merchant's daughter of a failed silk business in Osaka in 1870, one does not have the architecture to say anything else. The debts are real. The arrangement is the solution. And you have been raised, since before you could read the ledgers, to understand that your value is practical. What you have not been told is this: the man you are marrying is a Kagema. And in Meiji Japan, in the year the old world is being dismantled and reconstructed by people who are in a very great hurry, that word contains an entire universe of things that polite society has decided to neither discuss nor dismantle. Let me tell you what it contains. In the Edo period, a Kagema was a young male entertainer in the pleasure quarters. He performed.
He sang.
He danced. He was, in the specific and entirely understood language of the old Japan, available to wealthy patrons in ways that went beyond performance. The tradition was centuries old. It was documented, categorized, taxonomized. It had its own literature, its own art, its own specific aesthetic. Kabuki owed it something. The entire tradition of the Onagata, the male actor who plays women, was built partly on its conventions. It was not hidden. In the Edo period, it was simply a thing. Then the Meiji government arrived. New calendar. New postal system. New laws imported wholesale from European legal codes that had very specific and very un-Japanese opinions about the taxonomy of desire. Western civilization, it turned out, came with a list of categories, and the Kagema world did not fit into the approved ones, and so the government set about making it officially not exist. By 1871, the Kagema houses are shuttered in law, if not entirely in practice. The men who built their lives inside that world are now standing in a Japan that has decided they are, if not criminal, then at minimum, illegible, without a category, without a name that the new order will use. His name is Takumi Sirio. He is 34 years old. He has been illegible for approximately 2 years when you meet him, and he has had the specific experience of watching an entire identity be legislated out of existence by men who have never once considered what the people inside that identity are supposed to do next. The first time you meet him properly, he is not performing. This is, you will understand later, the most significant thing about that meeting. He is in the garden of his house in the Namba district of Osaka, and he is doing something so unexpectedly ordinary that it stops you at the gate. He is repairing a paper screen.
Carefully.
With the focused attention of someone who has decided that this specific task, in this specific moment, is the only thing that exists. His sleeves are rolled. His hands are steady. He does not look up when you arrive, because he is at the part of the repair that requires not looking up. You stand at the gate and watch him for perhaps 30 seconds before the housekeeper notices you and clears her throat. He looks up. His face, angular, precise, the kind of still that is not relaxation. You will come to understand this quality of stillness intimately. It is the stillness of a man who learned young that the face is a communication device before it is an emotional one, and who has made choices accordingly. He says, "You are the merchant's daughter." You say, "You are repairing a screen." He looks at you for a moment. Then he says, "It was torn." You say, "Most things are." Something in the arrangement of his expression shifts. Not much. Not dramatically. But you notice it because you have been trained, by 17 years of managing a household that was always one emergency from collapse, to notice the small adjustments that precede the large ones. He finishes the screen repair. You go inside and the marriage terms are discussed over tea by a go-between who handles everything with the brisk efficiency of someone who has learned not to let the specific circumstances slow the paperwork. You sign nothing, because women in 1871 Osaka sign nothing. But your presence is the signature. You leave his house that afternoon, and your mother is waiting at the gate of your family's house, and she reads your face before you speak, the way she always has. She says, "Well?" You say, "He was repairing a screen." She says, "Good." You say, "Why good?" She says, "A man who repairs what is broken is worth marrying." The house in Namba is quiet in a way that surprises you. You are not sure what you expected. The pleasure quarters of Osaka had a reputation that reached even into rice merchant households in the countryside. You expected something of that atmosphere. Performers, patrons, the specific heightened energy of spaces that exist for entertainment. The house is a house. A well-organized, somewhat spare, entirely functional house that has the quality of a space that has recently been simplified, things removed, rooms repurposed, a life that contained more than it currently contains. The housekeeper is a woman named Sato who has worked for the household for 12 years and who accepts you with the specific professional neutrality of someone who has decided to reserve judgment until she has sufficient data. She teaches you the household's language, not the rules, the rhythms. When certain things are done, how certain visitors are received. The specific protocol for the men who come on Tuesday afternoons, who are not announced, who stay for no more than an hour and about whom Sato says nothing and expects you to ask nothing. You ask nothing. This is the first piece of the household's language you learn. There are things here that have no name in the New Japan, and the way you navigate them is not by naming them but by understanding the shape of the space around them. The Tuesday visitors are men from the old life. Some are former patrons, now industrialists, now ministry officials, now the very men building the new Japan from the bones of the old. They come quietly. They leave quietly. They are managing something that has no official existence, and Takumi manages it with them, and the house makes space for it, and you understand this not with words but with the specific intelligence of someone who has learned to read what isn't said. You think of your mother's instruction. Listen for the part they don't say. You listen. Here is what you learn about Takumi Seiryo in the first year. He is precise in the way that people who have been required to present themselves perfectly for a living are precise, in his dress, his speech, his movement, the specific care he takes with objects and with the people he allows into his actual attention. He reads extensively. His bookshelves contain classical literature, Edo period poetry, and, increasingly, as the 1870s progress, Western texts in translation. He reads them with the frustrated concentration of a man who is trying to understand an argument that he suspects is being used against him, without fully understanding why it is considered an argument at all. He has a particular relationship with beauty that you have never encountered before. Not the appreciation of beauty. Everyone appreciates beauty. But the understanding of it as a craft, as a technical achievement, as something that requires skill and practice and deliberate attention rather than simply an aesthetic preference. He can look at a folding fan for 10 minutes. Not perform looking at it. Actually look at it. Understanding the work it contains. This is, you will realize, what he was trained to do. In the Kagema tradition, beauty was the work, not the decoration around the work. The work itself. He does not explain this to you. You figure it out by watching him. And he watches you figure it out. He does not say when you arrive at something. He simply changes the quality of his attention slightly, the way a teacher shifts when a student has finally understood the thing they have been circling. 2 years in, you are sitting across from him at the dinner table and he says, "You see things." You say, "I was taught to." He says, "No, that's skill. You were born with the instinct. The teaching only directed it." You set down your chopsticks. This is the first personal thing he has said to you that was not a practical communication. It arrives with the weight of something that cost him something to say. You say, "What were you born with?" He is quiet for a long time. Then, the ability to be whatever the room needed, which is useful and is also, as it turns out, a different thing from knowing who you are outside the room. You stay at the table for a long time after that. This is also when you begin to love him. Not before. After. The Meiji government is not finished. New laws arrive like seasons regularly, with the specific inevitability of a system that has decided to comprehensively remake every aspect of the country before anyone can object in a language the new structure is required to hear. The laws about the pleasure quarters. The laws about certain categories of relationship. The laws imported from European legal codes that view the specific world Takumi came from not as a cultural tradition with 1,000 years of history, but as a problem to be solved by classification and prohibition. He reads these laws. He reads them the way he reads the Western texts, with frustrated concentration and the specific intelligence of someone trying to understand the argument from the outside. One evening, he puts down the Gazette and says, "They have made illegal what they cannot describe." You say, "What do you mean?" He says, "The law names a practice. It does not name a person. But people have always lived inside the practice, not beside it. So the law has made people illegal without knowing that is what it has done." You sit with that for a long time. You say, "What do you do with that?" He says, "You become someone the law can describe. You use the categories the New Japan provides. You live inside those categories publicly and you tend the rest of it privately, and you hope the gap between the two does not become the whole of your life." He says this quietly. He is not asking for sympathy. He is explaining the architecture of his survival. There is a difference, and you hear it. You have always been good at hearing the difference. You say, "What is the rest of it?" The part you tend privately. He looks at you for a long time. Then he says, "The person I am in the rooms the New Japan hasn't legislated yet." You say, "Tell me about those rooms." He says, "That would take longer than tonight." You say, "I have time." And this is the moment the marriage becomes something different from what it was when you stood at the gate watching him repair the screen. Not a business transaction. Not an arrangement. A conversation that has finally agreed to be honest about its subject. He tells you over weeks and then months, in the specific incremental way of someone who has learned that full disclosure is a process rather than a moment. He tells you about the Kagema house where he trained from the age of 14, a choreography of performance that made the Hanamachi look simple. Not only entertainment, a complete art, movement, music, conversation calibrated to the specific desires of the specific patron, the reading of a room, the management of an evening, the specific skill of making the most important person in the space feel uniquely seen. He tells you about the patrons, the samurai who came in the last years before the samurai stopped coming, the merchants who came after, the ministers and industrialists of the New Japan who came quietly, without announcement, in their Western trousers, wanting something the New Japan had decided was not supposed to exist. He tells you about the other men, the Kagema he trained with, the ones who have since dispersed into the new social order in various ways, some with more success than others, some not at all. He does not tell you everything. You do not ask him to. You understand that the rooms she has kept private are not a secret being withheld from you. They are a part of his life that existed before you, and that the New Japan has made impossible to fully inhabit, and that he tends with the specific care of a man maintaining something that is no longer officially there. The Tuesday visitors continue to come. You make tea. You learn their preferences. You are correct and warm and you ask nothing. And one of them, an older man, a former daimyo's secretary who is now a treasury official, looks at you one Tuesday afternoon with the specific expression of someone who has just understood something about the household they are in and says, very quietly, "He chose well." You bow. You take his cup. After he leaves, Takumi comes into the kitchen and finds you making more tea and he says, "He said something to you." You say, "He said you chose well." Takumi is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "He is not wrong. This is the second personal thing he has said to you. You file it in the same place you file his silences, somewhere you can return to when the life gets heavy." The children come. 2 daughters, 1 son. The daughters are named for plants, Kiku, Hana. The son is named Sho, which means to rise. Takumi is a father in the way that surprises you, which is to say, entirely. He is present with the children the way he is present with nothing else in the public world, without the layer of performance, without the managed surface. He reads to them. He invents games that have internal rules of extraordinary complexity. He teaches the daughters to look at things carefully, at fabric, at garden flowers, at the way light moves across a paper screen. You watch him teach Kiku, at the age of 6, how to look at a piece of pottery. Not just look at it. See it. The weight of the clay, the decision in the glaze, the specific intention of the hands that made it. She picks up the bowl and holds it the way he showed her, and her face does something extraordinary. It opens. The specific opening of a child encountering the information that the world contains more than she previously understood. He looks at you over her head. His expression, the rarest thing his face produces. Something that is not for the room, not for the patron, not for the new Japan and its categories. It is for you. You have been building toward this expression for 6 years. The 1880s are different. The Tuesday visitors come less often. The men of the old life are older now, more encumbered by the new Japan's expectations. The world the visits belong to is further away. The house in Namba continues quieter now, with the specific adjustment of a place that has always been in the middle of a transition and has learned to live there. Takumi teaches. This is the thing he finds after the world that made him decides it doesn't exist anymore. He teaches the performing arts, movement, the fan, the specific vocabulary of the body and entertainment, to young men and women who are entering a Meiji theater world that is absorbing the old traditions and the new Western influences simultaneously, and not always successfully. He is an extraordinary teacher. You watch his students and you can see him in them, not the specific content of what he was trained in, but the quality, the attention, the understanding that performance is craft and craft is practice and practice is the daily decision to show up to the work. One of his students, a girl of 16 named Yoshi, who has the specific hungry focus of someone who has been told she cannot and has decided they are wrong, comes to you one afternoon while Takumi is working in the garden. She says, "What is he like? As a person, not as a teacher." You say, "He is the person who sees the thing underneath the thing. Every time, whether you show it to him or not." She says, "Is that why you married him?" You say, "I married him because my father's ledgers collapsed. But that's why I stayed." In the 1890s, the house becomes very quiet. The children are built and launched, each in their own direction. Kiku teaches at a girls' school in Kyoto. Hana has married a woodworker and lives in Arashima. Sho is in the merchant navy, sending letters from ports that have no Japanese names. The teaching continues, but at a slower pace. Takumi works in the mornings and sits with you in the afternoons, and they are long afternoons, warm and unhurried, with the garden outside the engawa and the plum tree that has been there longer than the house. One afternoon he says, "I have never asked you something." You say, "Ask." He says, "Did you know, when you came to this house, did you understand what I was?" You think about the 17-year-old at the gate, the screen repair, your mother's instruction, the Tuesday visitors, the years of learning the household's language before you understood the language. You say, "I understood enough to stay. The rest I learned." He says, "Were you afraid of what you'd learn?" You say, "Yes." He says, "And?" You say, "Fear is not the same as wrong. I was afraid, and I was also right to stay. Both things were true." He is quiet. Then he says, "The person I am in the rooms the new Japan hasn't legislated yet. I showed you those rooms." You say, "You did." He says, "And you stayed." You say, "I stayed." He looks at you with the expression that is not for the room, not for the patron, not for the category. He says, "That is not a small thing." You say, "No." He says, "Most people would not." You say, "Most people are not me." The plum tree in the garden loses its blossoms in late March. You are sitting together on the engawa watching this happen, the specific snowfall of white petals that means something is ending and something else is not beginning but continuing, which is different. He says, "I have been thinking about what I would tell my students. If I were to stop, what the thing is underneath all the technique." You say, "What is it?" He says, "That you can only show someone what is real if you have found something real yourself. All the technique in the world is just surface without it. The fan, the voice, the movement, it is empty if the person holding the fan has not stood somewhere true." He is quiet for a moment. "I did not know where true was until quite late." You say, "When?" He says, "The kitchen table. The first honest thing. When I said I don't always know when I'm performing. And you did not leave. You remember the dinner table. 17 years ago. The chopsticks down. The long silence. The beginning of love. You say, "Why would I leave?" He says, "Because the specific honest thing I said is not a simple thing in a world that has decided how to categorize simple things. You had reason to leave." You say, "I had reason to stay." He takes your hand. His hands. The hands that repaired the screen, that held his children, that demonstrated for 30 years the craft he was trained in, and then, when that world was legislated away, that found other work to put the craft into. The scar on his right palm, an old one, from a performance years before you met him, is under your fingers. You hold his hand. The plum tree continues. The new Japan keeps building itself outside the garden wall. And inside it, two people, old now, sitting with the whole of what they built from an arrangement that was a solution to a debt, through a life that the official categories never quite contained, toward this afternoon on the Engawa with the blossoms coming down. You did not know at 17 what you were choosing, but you have been good at learning what is real. He taught you to look, and you looked, and what you found, underneath the performed self and the legislated identity and the world that couldn't hold him, what you found was the person repairing the screen. Patient. Precise. Tending what was torn. You are worth marrying, your mother said about a different man. But she was right about this one too. Not because the arrangement required it, because you paid attention. And the thing about paying attention, real attention, the kind he spent his life teaching others and only learned himself at a kitchen table in Namba at the age of 36, is that it is its own kind of love. Maybe the most honest kind. The blossoms come down. You keep his hand.